Welcome into the Big City Sports Podcast. And there was a trade in the NBA that we all have known. Swig, what is your thoughts? And did the Brooklyn Nets win or lose this trade?
Oh, I have a lot of thoughts, man. But I mean, we got a big trade here. A guard, a former lottery pick, Dante Exum, was sent to the Houston Rockets, and I definitely was a little surprised to see him thrown in by Cleveland. They gave up on him pretty quick after he's cast off by Utah. I mean, we got to dissect that, man. What's Houston getting out of this?
Yeah, that's obviously not the trade, but that was a good joke there. James Harden is on his way to the Brooklyn Nets, a team that we cover on the show very, very much. We cover them a lot. And he comes into a locker room with Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and a lot of personalities on that team, led by first-year head coach Steve Nash. This is an interesting clash of players coming in there. So do you think that this fits their need, or do you think they gave up a lot in this deal?
I think both are true, honestly. I think it's fair to say. I mean, the Nets are clearly going for it. They are really going all in, pushing their chips to the middle of the table, trying to win a championship. It's an all-in type of move. James Harden has looked solid in the first couple games we've seen. They beat Milwaukee, another Eastern Conference contender, earlier tonight. Before we started recording, Harden looks good. And I do want to throw one thing out here really quick. Did you end up seeing that picture that went viral of Harden looking like skinny and in shape in his first game warming up for Brooklyn after looking like a blueberry in his last game with Houston in the blue warm-ups? It's like, I mean, maybe like he was stashing all the ones that he was using at the Houston strip clubs and he just dropped them out, let them out of his warm-up because the strip clubs in New York are all closed. I'm like, how did he do that, man? It was like 2 days.
Yeah, it seems like he had a lot of weight on. I mean, maybe that's stress. Maybe he's just shoveling the food down his throat when he's in a place he doesn't like, and he immediately gets gone, and boom, there goes the stress, there goes the weight, and Harden's back to the Harden of old, playing good basketball for the Nets.
I mean, maybe it's like the rolls of dirty ones just fell out when he took his warm-up off because he knew he couldn't use them in Brooklyn right now. So, I mean, I don't know, man, but if they're still worth the same, send them my way. I'm happy to try to spend it for you. You know, the strip clubs around here are still open. I'm willing to do whatever it takes, man. But look, Harden looks good. We can tie back to basketball here. That'll obviously bring the Nets that big three that they've been wanting with Kyrie Irving, who's still gone AWOL, by the way. We got to get that situation figured out. But Harden reunited with Kevin Durant, who they played together on Oklahoma City about 7-8 years back. Made it to the NBA Finals one year with Russ Westbrook and Serge Ibaka on that team. This Nets team, it didn't come cheap. They have made a trade like this before. We've mentioned it before, a trade that was a complete disaster for them back in 2013, trading several draft picks and some cap filler to the Celtics for Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett, who were much older at that point in their careers than James Harden is right now. But I think it's great that the Nets, who are under new management, new coaching, were not afraid to push all their chips in here because they couldn't just sit passively and think that they were going to be finals contenders. They definitely, they definitely have a lot of talent on that team before the James Harden trade, but they did lose some of their depth. We have seen Spencer Dinwiddie already go down, but the Nets, well, they gave up a lot of draft picks to Houston in this deal. They have all three of their big core players under contract until at least the summer of 2022, when they all have player options, meaning they can elect free agency at that point. So that means they're going to have a minimum of 2 finals runs as a core. So they're giving themselves multiple shots here, and that makes it less of a short-sighted deal. Harden's only 31, and he's still a very productive player.
But with the personalities there, will it be a short-sighted run? I mean, this could be the only year of them together. One of them might have a little heartbreak going on to where they want their way out. I mean, that's something we just don't know with the NBA. I will say one thing here. The extension to Joe Harris in the offseason might be the biggest scenario here because he gives you a lot on that team. He's a great shooter and helps out that team big time. So him getting that extension, if for some reason this core breaks up, might save them a little bit more than they think.
It could. I mean, he is absolutely a vital piece of that core rotation. He is that big shooter. And we knew that was the Nets' big priority in the offseason. It was making sure they re-signed him. Outside of that, they mostly brought back a similar team. They made a couple of moves around the edges of that team. They do still have Landry Shamet as well, who can also shoot the ball, and he's definitely a factor. DeAndre Jordan is still a very solid player. He's not as young or has the same upside that Jared Allen does at this point in his career, but he is still somebody who can protect the rim and grab a lot of rebounds for you. He's improved a lot as a free throw shooter. So the Nets, I think the bigger key was more the depth that the first round draft picks and swaps that they gave up that extends all the way to 2027. They gave up 4 first round picks in total and 4 swaps, meaning the Houston Rockets will have the right to swap first rounders with them if it gets them higher in the order. And the reason they did that is because the NBA has that rule where you can't trade your first round pick in consecutive years. So allowing the right to swap essentially gets around that rule. But at least from the Nets' perspective here, they're going to have a minimum of 2 runs at the final with this core. It is possible, knowing the drama we've seen from all 3 of these players in the past, that maybe they don't coalesce. Maybe one of them wants to force their way out or try to get a more starring role. But at the very least, I don't think that's going to be an imminent threat. We know Harden and Durant have thrived together before. I think they can do it again. The Kyrie Irving situation is a little bit more unstable in terms of just when is he coming back to the team. But I think there's a lot to like from the Nets in this trade. It makes a lot more sense than the Celtics trade did at the time. And they've made it very clear that they're trying to win right now, and they made a move to go do it.
Yeah, I admire the stones that the GM had there. I mean, that's a big move to make. Bringing in someone that looked to be overweight, had his issues in Houston, wanted out, declined $50 million extension per year. That's big. That's a big extension that they just said, you know what, we don't need to do it. So James Harden, he wanted his way out. And I want to quote Max Kellerman real quick from First Take. He said, these star players always land where they want to. So if they want to go to a certain spot, they will get there eventually. So basically, you look at Anthony Davis, he gave that comp. He wanted to go to LA, sign in LA. Sure enough, they traded him to LA so that he could sign there. Similar situation here with Brooklyn. The 76ers were rumored as well. I think they were saying Ben Simmons and Tyrese Maxey, I think, was the offer. If that would have happened, who would have known if James Harden would have locked up there? I mean, he could still sign an extension with Brooklyn, which could be nice for them too.
No, I completely understand. It seemed like even a few weeks ago before the season started that Brooklyn and Philadelphia and possibly the Celtics were the most interested teams in getting him. We all knew Brooklyn wanted that 3rd star. I'm a little surprised it happened this quickly because we mentioned a few weeks back on the NBA preview that the Nets had all the leverage here, and the Rockets, they really did a solid job in terms of the return. They more than made up for the picks they gave up to Oklahoma City when they got Russell Westbrook in the first place. So considering that there were only a limited number of suitors that were willing to go all in for a guy like Harden, I think they came away better than we expected. But the Nets, while some of those draft picks down the line, let's say that one of these guys does leave after two runs or even sooner, or that they're all gone after a couple of years, those picks from 2024 to 7 might be really valuable for the Rockets, and the Nets might be screwed at that point. But if they win at least one championship now, that's all they're looking for, and they put themselves in a much better spot to do it than they had before. Their main competition in the East, they beat Milwaukee earlier tonight. The Celtics actually had a really rough game against the Knicks of all teams the other night, although Tatum was out. But there's only a couple of true contenders in the East, I think, that can really battle with them. So I definitely think it's fair to say that they're the favorite to make the finals out of the East if they stay healthy.
Yeah, I like the Nets. I think they do make the finals. I mean, a lot of people are saying that they will, but the thing is, I think Kyrie Irving will come back here soon. Honestly, look at what he has around him. He's seeing his friends out there playing basketball. That's something he wants to be a part of, I would think. I mean, it's hard telling with Kyrie. You don't know what he's doing or what he's thinking all the time, but I would guess that he's back before February. I just think that he rejoins the team, gets healthy again, starts playing. He's kind of like Dennis Rodman to this team.
Yeah, it's an interesting comp. I don't know if he's banging Carmen Electra on the side, but the Nets do have a couple other rotation players too who are going to be part of this team regardless. Bruce Brown is getting a solid number of minutes, I think a little bit more than I expected. So is Chris Chioza, the former Florida guard, hit that game winner in March Madness a couple years ago. So the Nets do have a decent number of pieces in the backcourt depth wise, even with Spencer Dinwiddie being hurt. Reggie Perry's starting to get some minutes now that Jared Allen is gone. They're second round pick behind DeAndre Jordan. I watched the Nets-Knicks game that was last week at the time of recording, and he had some very solid minutes. So I think the Nets are a little bit more well-rounded than they're given credit for. I don't think that the questions about the three ball dominant stars are invalid or anything like that. But I do think that they're at least overblown slightly. I'm willing to give the benefit of the doubt here. I have no doubt that Harden and Kevin Durant want to play together again. They missed an opportunity to win at least one ring with Oklahoma City before, and they might be even better positioned to win one right now. So I think that at least at the beginning, there will be some positive signs. Harden has played well in his first two games, but it is a toxic player-driven league sometimes, and that could change at the drop of a hat.
It could. Now let's talk about what the Brooklyn Nets gave up. Karis LeVert's a big name. Karis LeVert was someone that helped out this team a lot down the stretch, battled some injury issues with his time in Brooklyn. He was rumored to be on his way to Houston, not so much. He's on his way to Indiana. What does this say about the Pacers and obviously the scare that popped up on the injury report?
Yeah, the Pacers, I thought, had a really interesting perspective on this trade. I can definitely see why they got themselves involved. Really quick, obviously, the much more important part of this is player health here. The Pacers, during LeVert's physical, noticed a mass on his kidney. So LeVert is going to be out indefinitely. We don't know when he's going to make his debut for the Pacers. And I want to give kudos to them for discovering that could be a life-saving measure right there. Hope we wish him all the best. And I want to give props to them for that. But really quick on the basketball side, assuming that LeVert is able to come back, hopefully at full strength as soon as he can. The Pacers traded Victor Oladipo to Houston in this trade. It seemed likely that Oladipo was going to walk as a free agent. His contract expires after this season. Oladipo has done a lot for that franchise and for the state of Indiana, considering he went to IU before that and was very popular in the region. But if he was going to leave, it made sense to get something of value for him. Karis LeVert is 26, plays the same position. He's under contract until 2023, I believe, on a pretty team-friendly deal. He does need to work on his three-point shooting efficiency. He's only shooting about 34% for his career, but he is a very good player who can score the basketball, and in some ways is a younger, healthier version, at least until the kidney issues, of Victor Oladipo at this stage of his career. So I think it makes a lot of sense. I think he could pair with Domantas Sabonis very well. And kudos to the Pacers as well. They ended up getting an extra second-round pick and some cash from Brooklyn as part of the trade. They could have backed out when they got the results of LeVert's physical. And no, I don't think it would have been they shouldn't have been criticized for doing that. They have every right, but they have the faith in their staff and they have the faith in LeVert that he's going to be okay. They got a little bit extra out of it for their troubles. But imagine if this whole deal fell apart because of that.
Yeah, there'd be a lot of unhappy campers, but that's a good move there for the Pacers. Honestly, if you look at that as a whole, if LeVert comes back, this team's good and it's young. You have Malcolm Brogdon, Karis LeVert, Domantas Sabonis, and Miles Turner. Are you kidding me? This team, they could build. This is something they could build on. They have some first-round picks still available, so they could honestly work their way back up and build something in Indiana.
They very well could. They've been a consistently good team for a long time. They were a legitimate contender to win the championship back in the 2013-14 range when it was like Paul George, George Hill, David West, Roy Hibbert on that team.
Danny
Right
Granger.
now, we also have to mention that TJ Warren is out, and he's a very important part of that team. He got hurt earlier on in the season. We know the legend of Bubble TJ Warren from the restart, and he really, that was an absolute steal for the Pacers. They got him from Phoenix for cash. So we don't see that in the NBA very often, but for the most part, they're an intelligently managed team. Their version of bottoming out was 3 or so years ago. I know they've lost in the first round in the playoffs a lot the last few years, but they, despite not having the lottery picks, they actually drafted Karis LeVert originally, traded him on draft night. They got him back. They really are a consistently good team. Sabonis has turned into one of the elite players in the Eastern Conference. He doesn't get enough credit. I think LeVert can play very well with him because we've seen him average 6-7 assists a game, put up 20 points regardless. So I think it could be a very good pairing, assuming he does come back at full strength.
Yeah, I think it will. Look, the head coach, Nate McMillan, was there for a while. He left. So there's a new head coach there. They have a lot going on. I think this is something they could build. I know I said that earlier, but they could. This team, the motto is "We grow basketball here." So how about you grow it? Because I'd like to see this thing spurt up.
I mean, it would be interesting, man. Indiana's a basketball crazy state. I do think they're one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference. They're off to a solid start this year. I don't know if I'd say they're at this stage a legitimate threat to take down Brooklyn in the East, but I don't think that that's out of the question in a year or two. Obviously, a lot has to go right for them. They have to make some solid moves in free agency and the draft, and they don't have the fortune of being in a big market like Brooklyn does, so that might make it a little bit more difficult for them. But Oladipo deserves a big salute from any Pacers fan, and I'm sure they're all happily giving that to him. I wish him well in Houston, and I know any Pacers fan would as well. But I do think Karis LeVert makes a lot of sense, and that it's a solid move for their future. They picked up some second-round picks and some cash as well, and I'm curious to see how they put that to good use.
Yeah, now let's get to the main headline about Dante Exum being moved from the Cleveland Cavaliers going to Houston. But let's look here at the Cavs. The Cavs got Jared Allen in this deal. That's another big name that Brooklyn traded away. We talked about the big contract that DeAndre Jordan signed with the Nets, and that could have played a big role because potentially they probably would have signed Jared Allen a few years ago, locking him up because he's a good young center. Now he's on his way to Cleveland. A little bit of a timeshare there with Andre Drummond, but I think he could take over that job here down the line.
That's the plan. There's no doubt that they want him to be their center of the future. Jared Allen is a very, very good defensive player, rebounder, shot blocker. The Cavaliers were high on him previously, and it made sense. We knew that if the Nets were able to bring in James Harden or a similar star, that LeVert and Allen were going to be the two main roster pieces that teams were going to be asking about. To players like that don't come cheap. You have to give up solid, well-respected, productive players to get an all-star, and that's what they did. In the Cavaliers' perspective, Jared Allen's only 22 years old. I know that it looks a little strange right now that they have Andre Drummond and JaVale McGee on that roster as well at the center position, but both of them are free agents after the season. There's not a chance in hell that either one of them is going to be brought back, unless one of them is brought back as a backup. So Jared Allen is without question going to be the center of the future. He's under contract for a couple years in Cleveland, and I think he's going to be a really interesting fit. But that Cavaliers roster is a bit of a weird mix of young players and some veterans on kind of highly priced contracts, as they picked up Taurean Prince in that deal as well.
Yeah, Cleveland, they have something to build for. You have Isaac Okoro, the first-round pick. You have, of course, Sexland's the team name going around there with the duo in the backcourt. And they have a lot of moving pieces there with some youth, and I think they could build something there too. I mean, the East is full of a lot of teams that are trying to build sustained success. So I think that's good for the NBA down the line. The West has all the stars. Everyone wants to go out West. You have Luka in Dallas. You have everybody in Los Angeles. I mean, you look at the East, they're slowly starting to work their way up. You have the Knicks on the rise. The Bulls are getting there. But I'm saying the two teams that are more sustained success building faster timeline would probably be Indiana and Cleveland. So those two are looking up. So I think the East is really, really going to take shape here in a few years.
Well, the polite way to say they've been rebuilding for a while is that the East has sucked for several years. I mean, let's be realistic here, right? The West is still the much better conference. I think it's going to be a very interesting landscape. There's a couple of very clear favorites in the East in terms of Brooklyn, Milwaukee, Boston, possibly the Heat, the Pacers. You could make an argument for one or two other teams, but I think those five are at the top. But we've seen teams below 500 make the playoffs in the East. Maybe those days are coming to an end, but at the same time, the Knicks at the time of recording are 7-8 right now and in sixth place in the East because the Raptors are off to such a horrible start. So you never know. I think it's a little too early to say that like Cleveland will build something for the first time in their history without LeBron James. I'll believe that when I see it. because we've seen a history of guys leaving that franchise before unless LeBron shows up, and he's not coming back this time. So the Sexland backcourt is definitely a fun one to keep an eye on. Colin Sexton especially has turned into a very solid player from what I've seen. Darius Garland seems to be growing a little bit as well. It's where that name comes from. But they also have Okoro, the rookie defensive versatile stopper in that wing position, and Seti Osman as well, who's under contract a couple more years. So they do have their core very clearly outlined here. I do think that the big question for them is at the power forward position, because they still have Kevin Love under contract until 2023. Larry Nance, who is also under contract for that amount of time. And then Taurean Prince, who's making, I want to say 12 or 13 million a year. He's got this year and next year left on his deal. And I would be surprised if Cleveland doesn't move at least one of those guys to try to facilitate a little bit more cap flexibility or bring in some younger assets. And I think we also need to mention, I know this isn't directly related to the trade, but the Kevin Porter Jr. situation in Cleveland. It's a little bizarre.
Yeah, he was upset about was it the locker room he was trying to give up?
So Taurean Prince, when he was acquired in the deal, they apparently gave Prince Kevin Porter's locker. He got upset, pissed off, threw some food at somebody or in the locker room. And Porter's had some emotional and personal issues, outbursts since he's come to Cleveland. The Cavaliers, in fairness, have done everything they can to try to work with him. But it seems now after this latest outburst that they're either going to trade or release him if they can't find a trade partner. I'm really curious to see what happens there. I'd honestly love for the Knicks or a similar rebuilding team to take a flyer on him, because he clearly does have a lot of talent. And since he's not going to thrive in Cleveland, a team can really buy low on him and hope for the best.
Yeah, it would be interesting. I mean, he's still super young too. That's something that's definitely at the forefront with him. But let's talk about the other side of the trade. So we talked about Cleveland for a little bit. Let's head over to the Houston Rockets, who sent the superstar in this deal. That was a huge four-way deal. James Harden, of course, going to Brooklyn. They got back Victor Oladipo from the Pacers and a lot of picks. So kudos to their GM for honestly pulling off the best thing he could have done, given the scenario he was dealt with.
Yeah, he got 4 first-rounders and 4 swaps like we talked about a few minutes ago. That's the main part. They did get Victor Oladipo, who is a free agent after the season. So is Dante Exum from Cleveland. They do have Rodions Kurics. I believe I pronounced that right. I hope so. They also picked him up from Cleveland in the deal. So he's under contract a little bit longer. The Rockets, they've now traded Westbrook to the Wizards and Harden to the Nets within a few weeks of each other, and they are really in an interesting spot. They do have a good number of picks now. They replenished the picks they gave away and then some to Oklahoma City for Westbrook originally, which is good. Some of those picks later on like we mentioned, might be really high if the Nets win their championships and then fade off. But looking at them from a salary cap perspective, John Wall is still under a massive contract, and he has a player option. What that means is, for anyone who might not know, is he has the option to either opt into one more year on his deal, which is usually worth a lot, or hit free agency. And in Wall's case, because that option is worth $47 million, he will opt into that contract. There's no way he's getting that on the open market at this stage, right? So they're going to have him hamstringing them salary cap wise for a couple years. They have Eric Gordon, who's making, I want to say 17, 18 million a year under contract for 2 or 3 more seasons as well. So it's not quite as cut and dry to say that they can clear all their cap and really start from the ground up. They do have Christian Wood, who's played well for them and I think is on a very reasonable contract under there for a couple more years as well for more than 10 million. So they are in a really interesting spot in terms of roster building. They haven't bottomed all the way out, I'd say. They're definitely going to bottom out more than they have previously, losing both of their stars, replacing him with whatever's left of John Wall and Christian Wood, who has grown in fairness. But outside of that, they're not quite good enough, I'd say, to make a playoff run, but I don't think they're going to be quite bad enough to guarantee themselves a lottery pick or a high lottery pick. But if they miss the playoffs, the NBA lottery system could help them out. They have a lot of assets to build in the next few years. Once those contracts start to come off the books, I think they're going to want to build around Christian Wood. They're going to be stuck with John Wall, but I think they could unload Eric Gordon's contract on somebody, and that might help them spearhead that rebuild a little faster.
So you think Oladipo's gone basically after this year, no cap space to re-sign him?
I don't think it's impossible they bring him back, but I do think that that would make them less likely to bring in elite talent in the draft, at least in the immediate future. Oladipo is still a very good player, so if he sticks around and plays well enough, if the Rockets could end up sneaking in at the back of the playoff field or being like a 9th, 10th, 11th place team in the West that would most likely end up picking, say, 10th or 12th instead of 4th. And I'm not saying that they can't rebuild that way, especially because the draft class next year is supposed to be stronger than the previous one, that they might get somebody very good at that spot. But I do think Oladipo is more of a rental. I don't think they got him to be a core piece for them going forward. I could be wrong on that. He's still a very good player, and I understand if they want to make him that way. But I think they view him more as somebody who is on a big contract that they could either flip again before the trade deadline for more assets, or somebody that they will let go after the season so they have a little bit more financial flexibility going forward.
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough scenario for the Houston Rockets. I mean, they have their cards in front of them. It's just which one do you want to deal with the blackjack table? I mean, you have a full set of hands. It's just which one do you want to throw out there? I mean, you could speed up this rebuild and try to build something nice, or you could just go all in. But that John Wall contract is probably worse than the Kevin Love contract in Cleveland.
It's an interesting comparison. If you're the Rockets, what would you do with Oladipo? Let me ask it that way. You've heard my thought. What would you do with him?
I would try to re-sign him. Honestly, I would try to get rid of some of that cap space here. Not going to unload John Wall. I think you have to get rid of Eric Gordon and try to get Oladipo to stay, because Oladipo hasn't stayed anywhere in his career outside of a little bit of Indiana. Think about his early days. He was with Oklahoma City. Before that, he was in Orlando, I believe. So he's been Orlando, Oklahoma City, Indiana. He's been all over the map. So I think the best thing for him is to be somewhere that will absolutely stick with him through thick and thin. And I think the Houston Rockets would be a great spot for him. You have a great head coach there that reinvented the small ball, and you have the GM that's really been making some smart moves. So if he's smart, I think he might be smart to take just a little bit of a pay cut to stay with an organization that gives him that opportunity.
You know, I would be surprised to see him do that. I think he wants to get that big money contract, and if he has the opportunity to get that somewhere else, I think he would take it. I think it's more likely he stays in Houston if they manage to get rid of Eric Gordon, which I think is possible. But I think the Rockets would also have to attach one of their assets now, like a draft pick, to do that. Now they have plenty of them, so not that that's impossible for them now. But I think it's more likely they keep one or the other after this season. I'd be surprised if they kept both, just because they'd be very expensive, combining for most likely, say, $40 million on the cap. And considering you already have Wall and Christian Wood under contract for a lot of money as well, I just don't see that happening. So, that's the side from the Rockets. They had limited leverage, got a lot of picks. Exum, I think we can all agree, is most likely just going to finish out this season and hit the free agent market, even though he is the most important part of the trade.
Out of the four, who wins the deal? In order, 1 to 4.
If the Nets win a championship, they're number one. Let's make sure we're putting that up front. If they don't, they're going to be number 4, because they're going to be in really, really big trouble going forward if this core does end up being volatile and ineffective and doesn't win them anything. But if they win, they're number 1. It's hard to say ranking all 4 of them, because we need to see what the Rockets do with their draft picks, which will take a long time. We need to see how LeVert comes back from his kidney issue and plays for the Pacers. That's obviously going to be a huge factor. I think really the only one you can kind of get a general sense of right now is Cleveland, because Allen hasn't had a ton of injury issues yet. I think he makes a lot of sense as their center of the future, but we don't know how he's going to gel with that Sexland backcourt and everything like that. I don't like to do that kind of clickbait type of let's rank everybody right now when they've played 2 games with their new teams, if that. So it's just we'll give it a year. We'll come back and visit it in the offseason.
Yeah, I'm leaning with Houston right now. They got a haul. I mean, 7 years of first round picks. I mean, obviously it's not consecutive, but they have a lot of first round picks in this deal. I don't think you can go wrong. If you hit on half of them, you're still going to be a good team. So that's where I stand on this so far. Let's transition to baseball real quick. We have some news to talk about, a lot of baseball news, actually. Mets, Yankees, Cubs, White Sox, all making moves to help bolster their team, except for the Cubs. They actually got less or got worse in their deal. But the others have spent money, and in a big market, that's what you should do. Take notes there, Tom Ricketts. But anyway, let's head over to a team that did spend some big money, or not necessarily yet. The big move, the big splash, Francisco Lindor heads to Queens and is the shortstop for at least this year, but I would assume he's going to lock up a big contract.
Well, the Mets, they got their new owner. They have the biggest pockets in Major League Baseball. Steve Cohen is by far the richest owner in the league, and the Mets are finally going to be representative of a New York team with basically unlimited financial resources. They don't give a shit about the luxury tax. They don't give a shit about, there's no salary cap. So they have the financial ability and the big market appeal to be aggressive and go get whoever the hell they want. And Francisco Lindor does make a ton of sense. He's obviously a great player, switch hitter, who had a bit of a down year for the Indians last year, or the Cleveland baseball team coming up. We got to get used to that. But they also picked up Carlos Carrasco in the deal, who's still a very solid pitcher at this point, who came back from a cancer scare a couple of years ago, and we're happy to see him not only back, but pitching effectively. But Francisco Lindor, right now, the only question is, do they get him signed to that big term contract? It's kind of similar to when the Dodgers got Mookie Betts, who had 1 year left on his deal in Boston. They knew he wasn't going to re-sign there, but they had to sign him to a big money contract to make it worth it. They did. They won a World Series already. The Mets are going to need to sign Lindor for a long-term contract. And I have no doubt that that's going to happen, but we do need to see it before we can say that they won the trade.
Yeah, I think that deal gets done before opening day, to be honest. I mean, that's what Mookie Betts did. Obviously, the shutdowns sort of hindered those talks for a little while, but he signed that deal right away. He signed it like he signed it before he played a game, is what I'm trying to say. And I think Lindor does the same thing. Before they play a meaningful game, I think Lindor signs it. Just think, I know this probably doesn't sound good from a Yankee fan, but seeing him in those Photoshop things with the Mets, he looks nice. I'm not kidding. He looks nice.
Francisco Lindor is going to look nice in any uniform if you're a fan of the team. He's a great player, and the Mets should be excited to have him. I think it's a good representation of what we can expect to see from them more often now under Steve Cohen, under that new ownership and management. And I think Mets fans should be excited about that. They did give up a couple prospects in the deal. The Mets farm system is now ranked near the bottom of the league. That is one thing they need to keep an eye on, but there is a lot of talent on this roster right now. And if you look at them financially in the middle of this pandemic, when a lot of teams, including the Cubs, are trying to save money, get rid of these type of players, they are basically Devontae Smith, and the rest of the league is Sean Wade trying to pinch pennies. And the Mets are just over here bullying the shit out of everybody, making these moves aggressively because they can. And for the first time in a really long time, and they can do it consistently. This isn't going to be a one-off either. Don't forget, they already signed James McCann to a 4-year deal to be a catcher, a very good one that they've needed, who can replace Wilson Ramos. And they also brought in Trevor May in the bullpen already. They are clearly the most aggressive free spending team in the league right now. They're not going to be the only ones here. Hopefully in a year or two, maybe things get closer to normal, but they don't care about the luxury tax. They're going to go out and be aggressive and try to win right now. And they're never boring, even when they suck. And I don't think they're going to suck right now. They got Carrasco, and in a separate move, they picked up Joey Lucchesi from the Padres. So add that to DeGrom and Stroman and David Peterson and several other pitching options. There's a lot to be excited about. And then you add Lindor to that lineup that has Conforto and Pete Alonso and everyone else. And it's something that Mets fans should be excited about.
Yeah, they've also been rumored to George Springer. I personally think he goes to the Blue Jays sometime later this week. That's just a gut feeling. But besides that, one thing here, the Mets, they're going to be built for a long time. But first of all, I want to talk about Carlos Carrasco. What does he bring to this team? Obviously, he's probably going to be in the rotation. Do you think, where does he stack up? Is he going to be the 3 on this team? Is he going to sit maybe lower in the rotation? Obviously, they could still sign Bauer with all the pockets they have. We could see that happen. But, I mean, there's a lot to look forward to this Mets team. Right now, do you think Carrasco's a 3?
I think that's a good place to start him because one thing you have to remember is Noah Syndergaard is still recovering from Tommy John surgery. He's not going to be ready to pitch at the beginning of the 2021 season. The hope is that he comes back sometime in the middle of the year. So hoping that everyone else stays healthy. Yeah, obviously DeGrom's going to be your number one. I'd say Stroman is likely to be a number two on that qualifying offer. Assuming he's healthy. He hasn't pitched a whole lot in Queens so far. I'd say Carrasco is a steady middle of the rotation presence. He might not be quite what he was a few years ago, but he was still a very good pitcher for Cleveland this past season. He has been most of his career. I think David Peterson, who had a very, very good rookie season, should be the number four at the very least. But since he's so young, it is possible that he has a bit of a sophomore slump, and it's just something they need to watch out for with that. And I think Lucchesi is honestly another alternative to Steven Matz, who had a very disappointing and bad season last year. He's a left-handed pitcher who can slide back and forth between the rotation and bullpen if necessary, and provides a little insurance until Syndergaard comes back.
He's got a funky delivery too. That's something to keep an eye on. And with the left-handed power in that division with Harper, Freddie Freeman, Juan Soto, you probably need someone like that that's kind of funky. But let's talk about that bullpen real quick. I mean, a lot of people aren't pegging him to have a great bullpen. But if you seriously look at the numbers, I don't understand the Edwin Diaz hate. This guy had a phenomenal year last year if you throw out the first few weeks. I mean, that's just, he's getting pummeled in the city of New York. Rightfully so. The year before, he was bad. But he was good down the stretch. So you have Edwin Diaz, Seth Lugo, who's also a potential rotation option. I think he transitions back to the bullpen. They were rumored to Brad Hand. They already have Trevor May there. You have a bunch of pitchers in that bullpen that are really solid. And I think this could be the best bullpen in baseball.
I think it's possible. Edwin Diaz, like you said, deserved the criticism in 2019. He sucked. He was terrible when he was brought over from Seattle with Robinson Cano, who is not going to play this upcoming season, by the way. So that's another reason the Mets needed an infielder. But Edwin Diaz, after a rough start to 2020, did pitch much better. If he can do that consistently, he will be a good closer for the Mets like he was in Seattle. But that is a big if. They need to see him do that more consistently. They haven't seen it yet. 2020 was a weird year. Hopefully this year is less weird, and we can get a better sense of who he can be. They have Dylan Betances as well, the former Yankee, Chasen Shreve. They have a couple former Yankees in that bullpen that didn't have great years, frankly. So Lugo, I think, is the versatile piece who can pitch multiple innings out of the bullpen. But I'm not ready to say it's going to be one of the best bullpens in baseball yet because there's way too many question marks.
There are a lot of question marks, and just one more thing. You talked about the farm system for the New York Mets. Look, the Cleveland Indians, they got a decent haul in this deal. Obviously not the best deal they probably could have gotten because given the contract of Lindor on a one-year thing. But look, you have two young players, Andres Jimenez, who's going to be playing for them, and also the shortstop Ahmed Rosario. Both of them will play. I think they're looking at one to play short, one to play second. So playing time there in Cleveland.
They will get that playing time. And I think Jimenez in particular had a very underrated, solid year for the Mets last year. I hope for his sake that he can build off of that in Cleveland. He's not going to be Francisco Lindor, but he can be a very solid bat and glove in that lineup. And we'll see how he transitions. But I think it's a decent landing spot for him.
Yeah, a good spot for them. But let's talk about the New York Yankees now. It's been a while since we've talked about the Yankees because, frankly, they haven't done hardly anything in the offseason until one day where they unloaded everything and signed both DJ LeMahieu and Corey Kluber. A lot of holes in that rotation. Kluber gives them to that. And then they also signed the big bat, which was he really sped up the process of getting signed.
Well, we talked a little bit ago about how the Nets' clear priority in their offseason was to keep Joe Harris around. The Yankees' clear priority was to re-sign DJ LeMahieu. So I think it was a similar approach. LeMahieu has been the Yankees' best player for the 2 seasons they've had him, and I understand why they wanted to bring him back. I was a little surprised that it ended up being a 6-year deal instead of 3 or 4, but I honestly understand it. The Yankees are one of the many teams that are operating under a limited financial resource. They only have so much money they can spend right now, or at least how much they want to spend right now under Hal Steinbrenner and company. They have become one of several teams who has become very conscious of, or cognizant, of the luxury tax rule. And I'll give a very brief explanation. This works for any team. If your team's payroll for 2021 is over $210 million, if this is your first year exceeding that threshold, you get a 20% tax on the amount over that you go. So if you have 215, you get 20% tax on 5 million, for example. That goes to 30% for the second year and 50% after that. You reset if you are under it for 1 year. And the Yankees did that a couple years ago because they had guys like Judge and Torres and Sanchez, et cetera, all on these small arbitration deals. So they were able to get reset under those tax penalties. The reason I bring that up is because they wanted to bring LeMahieu in. They got him 6 years, $15 million a year, because that annual average value for them helps them stay under that luxury tax, giving them enough flexibility to bring in Corey Kluber. I don't think they're done yet. I think they're going to bring in at least one bullpen arm, but LeMahieu is a consistent batter. He's a versatile fielder who provides a little bit of consistency in a lineup with a lot of swing and miss, a lot of inconsistency, and I think he was very important to bring back, even though he is 32. The last couple of years of the contract might not be great, but if he continues hitting like this for the first 3 or 4 seasons, he will be well worth it, providing a little stability in a very volatile lineup.
I think that 6th year was a deal setter for him. I know the Yankees' first offer to him was $4 million. I heard that from a source. But then later on, he said that he wanted to go to 5. A lot of teams were giving him 5, and they were talking about that. The Yankees countered with 6. So I think that was huge for him too. Not just the big money up front, but he would rather have the years than with a smaller salary, because, I mean, frankly, that's not a bad contract for the best hitter in the American League.
No, and since he's more of a contact hitter than a power hitter, I think there is some truth that his skill set won't diminish quite as quickly. I'm hoping that's the case. I'm not going to lie here. I don't want him to decline quickly, but he has exceeded every conceivable expectation. Don't forget, when he was originally signed, he was supposed to be a utility infielder, and Troy Tulowitzki was supposed to play shortstop for the Yankees, and he was supposed to back up. And Tulowitzki ended up playing like 5 games, and he got put at first, second, and third, and hit .330 and won a batting title last season, and he's a good fielder as well. I mean, you could not ask him to do any more. He's just consistent, gets a lot of hits with runners in scoring position and on base, and he just keeps the table moving. I want to talk about Kluber a little bit, though. I was a little surprised at first when he was brought in. I get the 1-year deal with a lot of incentives, but I looked a little deeper into it. The Yankees do have some Cleveland connections in their staff, and the one I wanted to bring up is a guy named Eric Cressy, who is the I want to say director of player health or medical information, something like that. He has a caveat in his Yankees contract where he's allowed to work with private clients during the offseason, and Kluber is one of those private clients. So I think we kind of had like the inside track as to being a little bit more comfortable with Kluber's health situation, because he's barely pitched in the last 2 years.
Yeah, he hasn't pitched, but one thing here, obviously the health is at the priority for him if he's going to stay healthy throughout the year, because there's been a lot of injury issues in this Yankees rotation for quite some time now. He had it with CC, had it with Paxton. Both of them are gone. Kluber steps in. If you can get 30 starts out of him, even 29, something like that, that'd be great. Not just if you're worried about his production, he's a ground ball pitcher in one of the most home run friendly ballparks in the world. So if you can get ground balls and stay healthy, he's going to bring a lot to that rotation.
He could. Look, he sums up the Yankees rotation right now really well. High risk, high reward. This could very easily be a flop. If Kluber pitches 1 inning like he did for Texas last year, he'll be pretty useless. Or if he pitches 40 mediocre innings like he did in 2019. But if we get anything like he was when he won 2 Cy Young awards, if he's even close to that, he will be a great value on a 1-year deal. You look at the rotation, though, he'll slot in most likely behind Garrett Cole as the number 2 if he's healthy. But, I mean, look, that makes Masahiro Tanaka a lot less likely to be brought back. I thought that they might try to bring him, but he might either sign a 1-year deal somewhere else or go back to Japan. Paxton and Jay Happ are still free agents, and I don't think the Yankees are going to bring Happ back for sure. Paxton only if it's a 1-year deal, kind of like Kluber's, because he has a lot of the same injury issues. then you look at the other options. Davy Garcia, I liked what he did last year, but he's a rookie who's made 7 or 8 starts in his career. Clark Schmidt has done even less, and the Yankees might be relying on him. Jordan Montgomery is that lefty rotation piece who's inconsistent, hit or miss. He had a good year a couple years back. He pitched decently in the Yankees playoff game, but I think he's very inconsistent. So the big questions right now are, when does Luis Severino come back? He's kind of similar to Syndergaard for the Mets, coming off Tommy John surgery, expected back around June or July. And then the real wild card is Domingo Germán, who's coming back finally after some self-inflicted stupidity that's kept him away from baseball for a year and a half. Do the Yankees even welcome him back? And if they do, can he pitch well? I think it's a really interesting and fair question to ask.
Yeah, there's a lot of question marks in that rotation. And let's switch over to a team that has a lot more question marks in their rotation, the Chicago Cubs, who dealt their ace. They traded away Yu Darvish and got a bunch of, to quote David Kaplan, they got a bunch of fourth graders in return. I mean, there's all these young kids, 17 years old. You couldn't even know any of their names when you looked them up. I think only one of the players have had minor league at bats. The rest of them haven't had any minor league stats or anything. So definitely a wild card here. I think this shows the direction of the Cubs. You get Zach Davies back in the deal. I talked to Jesse Rogers from ESPN personally, and he said that could be a deal that will get dealt at the deadline. He could be someone that on a 1-year contract, anyone with a 1-year contract could be moved at the deadline. So I think that the Cubs could be transitioning into a rebuild because they don't have any money to spend.
Yeah, they are very clearly a frugal approached organization now. And in fairness, they are not the only ones. We're seeing this across baseball, but I don't think we're seeing a team hemorrhage talent more obviously right now. The Cubs have lost a lot of pieces. They did get Zach Davies back in the deal, and then 4 high-risk prospects that might or might not eventually play games for the Cubs. We'll see. It could work out. Look, they've lost a lot of major league talent off this roster. John Lester signed with the Nationals, so did Kyle Schwarber. They have Anthony Rizzo and Javier Baez and Chris Bryant all going into the last year of their contracts. Like you mentioned, one or all of them could be traded at the deadline, so they don't lose them for nothing. That could help them build up a new core, hopefully, that they get some key pieces back in that deal. But obviously, there are no guarantees in this world. They're in baseball, and we've seen teams try things like that and struggle for a long time. So they transitioned from Theo Epstein to Jed Hoyer, and Hoyer's made it very clear, like trading Darvish in the last 3 years of his contract, they want to shed payroll, they want to cut costs, and they're most likely going to sacrifice some wins in the process.
Yeah, this rotation, if you look at it now, not a lot of them throw above 90 miles an hour. I'm just saying it. Your best 3, Kyle Hendricks, Zach Davies, Alec Mills, their average fastball velocity is about 89 miles an hour. I think Hendricks topped out a few years ago in 92. I'm not even kidding. So they're all precision guys. And if the wind's blowing out at Wrigley, that could definitely set them up for failure. Obviously, the Pittsburgh Pirates had some big bats with Josh Bell. He's out of the division. But there's still a lot of talent in that division that can hit home runs. But looking at it as a whole, you hit the nail on the head with the financial issues with the Cubs. There's just so much going on. A lot of these teams are not spending. The only ones that have spent money in the offseason, I believe, San Diego, both New York teams, the White Sox, of course. And you could even say the Kansas City Royals bringing in Carlos Santana, Mike Minor, Michael Taylor, I think also. But outside of those, I mean, no one's really spending money. The big name free agents are still out there. You have Marcell Ozuna off a good year. Trevor Bauer's still out there. There's just a financial rescindance happening in baseball right now to where none of these teams want to spend money, both with the luxury tax that you talked about, and frankly, they don't have any wiggle room to spend anything. And the big news for baseball is if you get butts and chairs in the stadium and you could sell beer, that's how you bring in your money. Because outside of that, we've seen all these teams take big hits, and the Cubs are at the forefront.
Well, they're definitely one of them. Owners across baseball didn't make the same money they normally would off these teams, but let's also remember, they're all billionaires here. I think some of this is at least slightly overblown, but owners sometimes make it clear that this is a business at the end of the day, and they don't want to hemorrhage money more than they might already be doing. It's not like I have access to these guys' income statements, but I do think some of it's a little bit overblown in terms of these guys are all worth billions of dollars. So, and the Cubs and all these local and national TV deals, like at least will help them reinvigorate some of that cash flow. And we know that they'll eventually be able to bring fans back. I hope. I know we all look forward to when that happens. But in the meantime, you look at the Cubs. You could also argue. I mean, I want to get your take on this. They couldn't trade Schwarber by the time they let him go as a free agent. I don't know how much value Chris Bryant has left. Not much. I mean, those two in particular, their trade values both plummeted. Do you think the Cubs mismanaged that? Do you think both of them should have been out the door 2-3 years ago when they had more value?
Not 3 years ago, but I was calling for it last offseason. You look at how this Cubs offense happened. 2018, the end of 2018, the second half, right down the window. All of 2019, up and down. Granted, the bullpen blew every single save opportunity, including when Kimbrel came over. But the offense was just so up and down. You'd have freaking 7 runs, and then you wouldn't score like 3 runs for a week, and then you'd have 15 against the team, and then it just dropped down. So much inconsistency with this team. So I thought the core needed to be broken up 2 years ago, but they waited too long. And I think that's what Theo Epstein didn't want to do. He didn't want to be the guy that built it up to tear it down and leave, knowing that he teared it down and not seeing what he could have done. He waited till everything was just perfect for him to give the transition to Jed Hoyer, which I don't hate that, because Jed Hoyer's making the moves now. He's been involved in the process for a while. But look, Kyle Schwarber, let's call a spade here. He was going to get less money in arbitration, but took a higher contract out on the market with the Washington Nationals. So that's trade value for a team for like the Cubs. If they just sign it and trade him, he's getting less. You're getting him on a cheaper 1-year deal than if you would have just signed him for more money. So that's what the Nationals did. And you mentioned that Lester went there with him. Obviously, that was a little bit later in the process. But look, who's the manager with the Washington Nationals? Dave Martinez, who is the bench coach with Joe Madden with the Cubs and also with the Tampa Bay Rays. He was a Joe Madden prodigy, and he's worked his way over to Washington, where he's won a World Series and has been a highly respected manager during his time. Obviously, the start in that 1 year wasn't the best, but he won the World Series there. But they love Dave Martinez. They do. I mean, they loved when he was around. And frankly, when he left in 2018 was when everything started to fall apart. So I think a bench coach as similar as Dave Martinez could be the difference between this Cubs roster. And another name, Jim Hickey was the pitching coach for 1 year with the Cubs. Absolutely terrible. John Lester liked him a little bit, but he's now the pitching coach in Washington with Dave Martinez. So maybe that attracted Lester a little bit too.
Yeah, it's kind of similar to the Yankees-Cleveland connection. You see some of the connections with the Cubs and the national staffs. I understand if you're going to be frustrated now that they're kind of forced into a rebuild and they don't have the same leverage that they might have had before. But I think at least one thing we can always give them credit for is the Cubs are always doing something at the trade deadline, whether it's buying or selling. My prediction here is I think they're going to sell Kimbrel at the deadline to somebody desperate for a reliever. That'll cut them some money. I know that Kimbrel doesn't have quite the same value as he did in San Diego or Boston, but I'd be shocked if somebody doesn't come calling for him.
Yeah, and Chris Bryant, real quick before we talk White Sox, $19.25 million in arbitration on a 1-year deal. Are you taking that contract in a trade? Heck no. Heck no. No one's going to take that contract. I mean, the only hope here for the Cubs is that he gets off to a tear in the first half and you unload him at the deadline to where someone will take on that money, because I don't think anyone's saying, ooh, Chris Bryant at 19.25 when he hasn't been the same since getting hit in the face in Colorado. I mean, honestly, I don't think anyone was screaming to accept that contract.
I think that's fair. I mean, he's not worth 19 million right now unless he rebuilds his value. But I think you have to remember, if he does get moved at the deadline, let's say there's 10 or 11 million left on his deal, the team will only be on the hook for that. So I think it's a little bit more likely they find a flyer on a team desperate for a little defensive versatility at third and left field and looking for some right-handed power. But overall, I do agree that the salary doesn't match the production of recent years, but at the same time, since it's only 1 year and then he'll be a free agent, somebody might be willing to take a flyer, because it's not like they're completely screwed on the cap for multiple years down the road.
That's a true point. And the last thing here, pitching rotation, it's got to be a big year for Madbert Alzolay if they want to have a shot. Young kid, he finally gets a rotation spot, I would assume, unless they pickpocket somewhere else. They signed Shelby Miller, but that's not going to help. You look at this Cubs team, honestly, here, they don't have a left fielder either. Left field's wide open. Michael Hermosillo is going to be the opening day left fielder unless they make another move. So that's problematic. But the crazy thing is that the NL Central is still winnable. So if they do get off to a fun start, do they just write it all out similar to how Kansas City did a few years back?
That would be a really interesting hypothetical. It'd be like they accidentally become contenders for a year and then, oh, wait, they're going to lose everybody in the offseason. So I'll believe that one when I see it. Yeah, the Reds are a much better team, I'd say, with that solid starting rotation. The Cardinals are almost always pretty good. Although the Brewers and the Pirates, the Pirates especially, are not a threat. But I don't think it's impossible they slip in and make a brief playoff appearance, especially if it stays expanded in 2021. But I think the Cubs are going to be wise enough and frugal enough to know that they're not good enough and they're not even trying to really win a World Series right now. They're hoping to build up another contender in a few years.
Yeah, it appears that Stephen Brault might be starting opening day for the Pittsburgh Pirates. But let's talk about the White Sox here. The White Sox bring in Liam Hendriks, who's been one of the best closers in baseball these last 2 years. He's been phenomenal with Oakland. They brought in Lance Lynn to their rotation, the big fat guy with the beard who cannot love him. And this team's getting interesting here. Honestly, this team, they have a lot of talent around them, and they're finally spending money to help reinvigorate that talent.
Well, the White Sox are in a win now position. Unlike, I'd say, the Cubs, their approach. I'd say the Yankees and Mets are trying to win right now. So are the Chicago White Sox, and they took a big step forward last year, ending a playoff drought. And now they are clearly going for it. They might be favorites in the American League, or at least they're a team to discuss at the top of the league. They've made 3 key moves so far this offseason. Let's start with Lance Lynn, right? They gave up Dane Dunning, a very talented young pitcher, in that trade to Texas, but that's the type of guy you give up if you're making a win now type of move. Lance Lynn is a solid number 2 or 3 type of starter, I would say. He's been very good, pitched pretty well for the Yankees in his brief stint with them, and has pitched very well in Texas, kind of reinvigorated his career a little bit because he was kind of a consistently decent pitcher in St. Louis, but I don't remember him being much more than that. He has really turned himself into a durable guy who can eat a lot of innings, and that he slides in perfectly in that rotation behind a guy like Giolito. So they gave up Dunning, who's less of a sure thing, but with a higher ceiling. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's a big move for them. That bullpen's looking good. Aaron Bummer's still there. They did lose Alex Colomé, who, I mean, not technically lose him. He's a free agent right now. They could still bring him back, but I don't think he'd want to go there not to save games. But this team looks good. They lost their DH spot, of course. They had Edwin Encarnacion there, Nomar Mazara a little bit. Nelson Cruz is still available. If you put him on that lineup, they're going to be hitting some moonshots. I don't know their salary, or not salary, but the money situation there. But you put him in the White Sox lineup, watch out.
Well, I can tell you a little bit about the money situation for him. So first of all, Nelson Cruz has aged like fine wine after his PED suspension. Whoever thought that would have happened? But kudos to him. He's really done a good job in Minnesota the last few years. But so one of the reasons the White Sox didn't go out and try to go out and sign Trevor Bauer, or at least not yet, like a really expensive big name pitcher. They got Lance Lynn, who's a much more reasonable cost, because they wanted to keep some money open to sign a closer, which they did. They just brought in Liam Hendriks, basically to be Colomé's replacement. He is on a 3-year deal. They kept enough money under that luxury tax that we're talking about. They are on a budget. Most of their young lineup, guys like Tim Anderson, Moncada, etc., are on small contracts so far. They're not on these $20 million a year deals. So they do have more room under that luxury tax for now. That's not going to last forever than you might expect. So they were able to bring in Hendriks to replace Colomé, who's been an elite reliever. He got a 3-year contract. Did you end up seeing that thing with the option in his 3rd year?
Yeah, it's the same exact thing, that if they wouldn't have picked it up or not, he still have been making it. So it's basically he's there.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting because, like, if he gets traded at any point, that it becomes guaranteed for whoever picks him up. And if the White Sox do decide, oh, he sucked for the last 2 years, let's let him go, they still have to give him the $15 million to go away. They just pay it over 10 years, kind of mini Bobby Bonilla style. So So I thought that was a really interesting structure. But anyway, he should be a very good bullpen piece for the next 2 years. He's been elite in Oakland the last couple of seasons, and we knew Oakland wasn't going to keep him around, knowing their famously frugal approach. But yeah, I think he slides in really well. And then you mentioned Mazzara. I think we got to talk about, they brought back Adam Eaton to take his place.
That's right.
Mazzara sucked. He had a terrible year for the White Sox last year. He was one of the few disappointments. Eaton is a left-handed bat that can help them out here against right-handed pitching a little bit, because I found an interesting stat for them. In this shorter season, they went 21-25 against right-handed pitchers. They were 14-0 against lefties during the season. That's pretty amazing, right? But right-handed people, you all suck, by the way, are more likely to be who you face on any given day, right? You're going to face more right-handed people, more right-handed pitching, and they can't go under 500 in a full season and expect to be true contenders. And there are some pretty elite right-handed pitchers in the American League. You can look at Garrett Cole. You can look at some guys on the Rays who have that potential. So they need to get some more consistent left-handed bats. Bringing back Eaton, I think, helps them out.
Yeah, go back to that wild card series with the A's. Notice that they didn't go to Manaea or someone like that in a big game. They went to Mike Fiers. They knew that stat. They play their little analytic game over there in Oakland, and they played it to their advantage. Yeah, barely. I mean, heck, that was a crazy game. Rick Renneria was out there going crazy. But one wild card here for the White Sox, Michael Kopech. I think we have one for all of these teams. Michael Kopech's the White Sox. Davy Garcia's the Yankees. Adbert Alzolai's the Cubs. And the Mets, I'd probably say David Peterson.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Kopech is so highly touted. I hope he's able to stay healthy. He's missed a lot of time, but he's still really young and really talented. And God, could he put them over the top? I mean, the potential is so tantalizing.
Yeah. Let's pop up our poll question of the week this week before we get out of here. Poll question of the week. Going back to the Brooklyn Nets here. If the Brooklyn Nets match up with the Los Angeles Lakers in the finals, will the Brooklyn Nets win a championship? The answers are strict, yes or no. And do you think that will happen?
Right now, I'd say the Lakers are still better. I mean, we saw it took the Warriors 4 stars to stop LeBron a few years ago. The Nets only have 3. I know that's I'd go into it more, but that's the simple version. I'll believe somebody beats LeBron and AD in their prime when I see it.
Yeah, that's well put. I mean, these two together are really nice. I think I'm leaning with the Lakers as well. But so that's going to wrap it up for today. Check us out on Spotify, also Apple Podcasts. Click the 5 stars or any stars you feel is appropriate, and leave your review at the bottom. We'd love to see that. Just anything you feel that reflected on your time spent with us today, leave that in the comments below. We would love that. And also on YouTube, if you want to see our pretty little faces, head on over there, comment below, and we can discuss some of that on the show as well. Check us out on Twitter, Big City Sports PD. And again, as always, Dylan Kern Swig signing off. This is the Big City Sports Podcast. We'll see you next time.